Choosing camera settings can be tricky for amateurs, especially when it comes to various indoor lighting conditions. Knowing how to use your camera and selecting the best camera settings is your key to getting clear and crisp portrait indoors. What's up folks, this is Raf, and today in this video we'll be going over camera settings for indoor portraits. Now, indoor portrait photography can pose quite a few obstacles. This video is going to explore the best settings for your camera and the different obstacles you'll encounter with indoor photography. The holy trinity of camera settings, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, make up the exposure triangle. This will be our first step to becoming a better photographer. Now, we've hit on that with a few of our videos, so definitely check those out if you'd like to have a better grasp on that topic. Your settings will depend on what type of photography you're doing. Wildlife, concerts, and night portraits will all have different needs. In order to determine any of the settings, you're going to want to understand your lighting conditions. The most crucial element is your light. Not having enough light can be a challenge when taking photographs indoors, and having low lighting and poor selection of camera settings can lead to noisy, dark, and/or blurry images. Here are some things to consider when it comes to light. What type of light are you shooting in? Are there large bright windows nearby? If so, position your subject near that natural light. Are you shooting during the day or at night? If shooting at night, what types of artificial lights do you have to rely on? And consider how powerful are said lights. Speaking of artificial lights, if you have time to prepare, take a few speed lights in the event there isn't enough adequate lighting. Now that you grasp how the light will play a role, you may have a few questions about what settings you should be using. Aperture settings for indoor portraits. A wide aperture will allow your camera to let in as much light as possible. When you're indoors, even if you're near a well-lit window, you'll struggle to capture the perfect light, and this is why using a wide aperture will help you out tremendously. Remember, your aperture is the opening to your lens. When you make it wide, you give it more opportunity to grab light to let in. Of course, aperture is measured by f-stops. Such examples will be f2.8, f4, f5.6, etc. The small f-stop represents wider apertures, so for indoor photography, start with the smaller f-stops to get brighter photos. Anywhere from f2.8 and lower should suffice, but don't be afraid to bring it lower if you need more exposure. Shutter speed settings for indoor portraits. Now that we understand aperture, we should talk about shutter speed. Again, the light will play a role in choosing your shutter speed. Just like the aperture widens to let light in, your shutter speed stays open for a period letting that light in as well. When you have a longer shutter speed, you let light in longer. This results in brighter photos. Your shutter speed is measured by a second or fractions of a second. Your shutter acts as a door. The longer you leave that door open, your camera can capture the scene and let light in. Just be mindful that the longer you leave your shutter open, the higher the risk of a blurry image. This is due to the sensitivity the camera has to any and all movement. To ensure your camera doesn't move, try using a tripod for longer shutter speeds. As for recommended shutter speeds, try floating around 1/60th of a second. If you stay in this zone, you won't compromise the integrity of your photo. Anything lower than 1/30th of a second, the camera might pick up the movement. ISO settings for indoor portraits. The last of the holy trinity, of course, is your ISO. Your ISO can help with your brightness. Select the highest ISO that you think you can get away with. You'll need to be very cautious though, as a higher ISO will result in noisy photographs. Each camera's ISO will work differently. The best way to understand yours is by doing an ISO test. Take several photos with different ISO levels. Once you've done that, look at the photographs you took on your computer and then zoom in to around 100%. Determine the highest ISO level you think is appealing to the eye, and remember that number. Use that number whenever you're shooting indoors. If you just so happen to have a lot of natural light near a large window or a good external flash, you'll be able to get away with a lower ISO. Here's a few more things to consider in terms of camera settings when you're shooting indoors. Focusing. Autofocus can be handy, but don't be afraid to use manual focus as well. When you're working with limited light, relying on your autofocus can be a bit risky. It is harder for a camera to autofocus with poor light, and your manual focus will be a lifesaver. Just be sure to have your focus peaking turned on if you do so. Editing. If all else fails, you can always use editing software like Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Lightroom, and Capture One to brighten your images. Not only will you be able to brighten them, but you can also adjust exposure, saturation, contrast, noise reduction, and whatever else you'd need to touch up on. And that's pretty much all there is to it when it comes to your camera settings for indoor portraits. With the tips we've provided, hopefully it's opened up a few doors for you when it comes to your next shoot inside. As always, if you found this video helpful and informative, give the video a like and be sure to subscribe to the BNC's YouTube page so you'll stay up to date with all of our cool content. Of course, this is Raf, and I'll see you all in another video. Ciao.